Before we move on to our next two interviews, we need a quick primer. When we talk about WASH today, we don't just mean water, sanitation, and hygiene as we usually speak about it in the urban or engineering perspective or the utility perspective. We're talking about projects that go beyond just infrastructure, municipalities, and utilities. We're talking about projects that have a very prominent human element to them. We're talking about projects in regions where there is a lack of adequate water, sanitation, and hygiene, and it's adversely impacting people's lives. So when we talk about WASH failures, it's not just as simple as a technology or engineering element not being up to task. We're talking about an ecosystem of technologies, remote projects implementation, social facilitation, stakeholder engagements, human injustice, financial business models, fog of war, and many other factors that can collapse the house of cards that is a WASH project and lead to project failure. Obviously, we as a sector ought to talk about and acknowledge our failures so that we can figure out preventative measures for the next time and the next project. We want to disseminate those learnings. We don't want everyone in the sector to make the same mistakes. And if we can stop making the same old mistakes, we can be a more efficient machine and make sure our limited resources only go towards success. So there have been previous studies on why WASH projects have failed going back many years. But this new initiative is the new generation trying to do something different and take the same old discussion another step further. I had a wonderful conversation with Dani on the story of how they got going, but unfortunately the interview was a bit long and a bit much to squeeze into the segment here. So we'll still hear the good stuff from Dani directly, but I'll give you the quick summary on how this project came to be. Dani, Esther, and Becky met up at the FSM4, Fecal Sludge Management 4, conference in 2017. That's Dani on the left, Becky on the right, and Esther in the middle. Try and remember those faces for a little later. At this conference, our trio noticed a rather high number of presentations talking about project failures and learnings from those failures. They had a subsequent dig through journal archives and found not only had WASH failures been a common conference theme since the 1970s, but they also noticed that a lot of this information had been published. They also noticed that it was always the project managers, academics, or administrators reporting on those failures and behind the publications. In 2018, Dani is now putting herself on stage running WASH failure game shows to break the ice at conferences. She got people to ease into the discussion in a light-hearted way before turning the heat up and getting more serious about why are projects still failing in the same old ways in the 21st century. This initiative was so successful that calls to action were proposed directly after these conferences, and they took the shape of the Nakuru Accords. The Nakuru Accords is a pact amongst WASH professionals and practitioners to be open and honest about failures in projects. And once this started gaining traction, a small budget was provided to Dani to start documenting WASH failures, capitalizing on this momentum and speaking directly to frontline professionals. So by now, the results are in, the numbers have been crunched, and the summary has been published. Waterwomanworld.com can point you towards the full reports and findings, which I would encourage you to see out. But this is where our interview with Dani picks up from. I wanted to know the full explanation in her own words, what she learned.
Yeah. So we interviewed 96 frontline professionals, and we realised that we weren't hearing from the funders of projects. So then we actually got some funding from the Sanitation Learning Hub at Institute for Development Studies, and we went and interviewed 20 funders of WASH projects, which ranged from really small funders up to big multilaterals. So then bringing together all of that, when we felt we had a pretty good picture of how everyone was thinking about failures that occurred, particularly in sub-Saharan African countries, we could see that one of the kind of like the overarching reason for all these smaller failures was the way that WASH is so often projectized. It's these sums of money for a particular area for a particular amount of time. There was a real pre-definition of what projects were going to be, and there was very little accountability to actual users on the ground. So really what we're seeing is that the implementers, for example, they are not accountable. They might be personally accountable and they might feel really bad being accountable to the people who are actually meant to be using WASH services in whatever form that takes. But really all of the accountability is upwards to the funders. And all the funders seem to think, well, we're different. We have a really good relationship with the people who implement the project, and it's all very participatory, and they always tell us the truth when they fill in their reports and things, which was just totally at odds with what we had from the other funders. Again, yes, again, we're fine, but all the other funders, they're having issues because they don't trust, they don't use participatory approaches and things. And then, of course, at odds with the 96 interviews we've done with frontline professionals. So that real lack of accountability also kind of, I think the way that it's playing out a lot on the ground is that there's a lot of wishful thinking in WASH. Something we also found between all of the different types of actors that we were talking to was that people have different definitions of when something is a success. So at the end of a project or a program, it might be like we can tick the box that it succeeded. But then people on the ground might think, oh, well, it's only going to be there for the next 6 months. It's not actually a success until you can see that's long-term sustainability. I think the thing which I saw that I don't know that it's surprising, but something I really noticed is that the accountability to users in terms of like designing programs as to what our intended users actually want seems to be the first thing to go. When the going gets tough or the funding gets tight, the first thing to go is planning with community members and that kind of thing. I feel like in the last 50 years, we have been putting more of the participation stuff in or moving up the participation ladder, but still not to the point where we're actually accountable to designing WASH services for the people who are actually going to use them.
So it sounds like when you were saying earlier, a lot of it's wishful thinking, that a new hashtag of washful thinking is needed. So there's actually a lot more rationale and flexibility around the finances. But I mean, for you personally, you were involved in a lot of it, digesting that information that came out of it. What surprised you the most out of all the results and interviews?
I guess what surprised me was that I wasn't surprised. I am the one who actually went through and coded all 96 of the frontline professional interviews. And of course, there were some shockers and times where it was like, oh my goodness, did someone really say that to this person? So it kind of then fell into two camps. So there were people who were saying it didn't work because the intended users weren't dedicated enough, and fair enough, they had other things on their plate. They wanted to send their kids to school, they wanted to buy food, they didn't care about WASH at that time. But then you had, the other half of people we'd interviewed who were saying it's their fault. They should have been doing this stuff. They should have been more invested and put more time in and more effort. And it made me a bit sad to see that really the way it was articulated sometimes, without thinking about the fact that even though we live and breathe WASH as being like the most important thing in the world every day, it's not necessarily how intended users feel. And so even though you might think that it's important that they are able to access the WASH that they want, and of course it is, you've got to figure out a way of working with people that makes the most of their time and their priorities and everything like that.
So then if I can be as bold to as ask, what's next? Like, we don't want this to become another dusty report on a shelf. I mean, you're not done with this. There's more on your side coming. But then what's the call to action for us in the sector as well that can learn from this and be better?
We have got a paper in review and a paper that we're writing at the moment looking at all the funder stuff. And we really want people to focus on that accountability thing. I can't say accountability enough. I think we live in a world where it's often easy to step back and say, well, it's just my job. I've got to feed my family. I don't need to be worried about this on a meta level kind of thing. But actually, we do have to be accountable to the people that we are trying to serve in the way that we've chosen to be WASH people. And we need to, if those of us who are in a more powerful position, who do have that privilege to step forward and say that, we have to start saying it. And it really drives me crazy when I hear about yet another session at a big global conference with people who work for big multilateral organizations or whoever saying, oh, Chatham House rules. We can't tell anyone what we're talking about. Instead of them being the ones who actually can admit to this is where things are going wrong. Because how can we expect people who are doing the job because they need the pay that day from doing data collection or whatever to feed their family to be the ones who have to step up and say, oh no, we've stuffed up and it's not working properly. So accountability, let's, put your head on the chopping block. It's scary, I know, but we've got to do something and not just keep making the same mistakes for over 50 years.
No, thank you, Dani. Yeah, thank you for challenging us to be more accountable and, like I say, put your head on the chopping block. It is scary, but you've done it. We should follow the lead. So thank you for joining us today, and good luck picking apart those investors when you do the next part of the WASH failures analysis.
Thank you.
So that was Dani. I'd like to thank Dani for joining us and sharing her wisdom. In the interview, when I said Dani put her head on the chopping block, I really do mean it. I'm ashamed to say that Dani has sacrificed more than I think I would be willing to have gotten that publication out into the world and all the work that was needed to get that far. Maybe that's a story for another WAP, but as promised, here are the Nakuru Accords that inspired this meta-analysis of WASH failures. These Accords list 9 points of how to be a better WASH professional and what accountability looks like in the workplace, that accountability that Dani was talking about. I also signed them a while ago and invite you to have a look at them too if you would like to have an honest moment of reflection on how we can be better in our work. That's waterwomanworld.com.